So, Todd Malloy, thank you so much for being with me again on Liberate and Love Your Authentic Self. I'm excited to have you here for this special edition, this Ask the Author series for Time to Rise. Todd, you are a very well-respected sex and relationship and family marriage therapist. What would possess you to be willing to share such a vulnerable story about your personal life in this book?
Well, I think it's very important to share with the public and with my clients that we're human too. Mm-hmm. That we're not just these academic, or I'm not just this academic person that's read a lot of books, but I've had to apply them to my own life, come up with my own experiences and learn and grow from them. So not only are my clients learning from therapeutic interventions, things of that nature, but they're able to meet someone that they can connect to. It allows me to be human. One of the things I often say in the therapeutic setting to my clients is it's okay to be human. Because too often times we think we can't be. We have to be better than, we have to be perfect. We have to be all of those things, and our life is supposed to be just so straight and direct and with no bumps and no confusions. And that's not real life. I know that's a story that people project, but it's far from reality.
And that's something you talk about in, your story. But before we get to the story that you share in the book, you really believe that people need to know that the life process, your perspective is that it's always going to be in transition. So for us to even have this idea that it should be fixed and perfect and we know who we are and we're right there, that's kind of a fallacy, right?
Oh, definitely. Remember, we're a part of life. We're a part of the universal order. So if you actually look at nature and the processes of life, it's not that picture. Think of the beautiful apple tree, for lack of a better word. But think about the process that it has to go through. A seed is planted in darkness. It goes deeper into the darkness before it even sprouts to see light. Mm-hmm. Through that transformation, even underground, there's a tearing of the skin. There's a growing, so there's a consistent shedding. So if you think about that process that it has to go through even before it breaks ground, and then the twists and the turns and the wind and the rain and all of these things that are created to cultivate that beautiful piece of fruit, actually our lives are not different. That's a natural order of life.
Yeah, that's a beautiful...
Right. And us being a part of life, we would follow that natural pattern.
Exactly. That's a beautiful analogy. And I love the way that you kind of just put it out there like, hey, we don't have to be perfect. This is a work in progress. Mm-hmm. But to get to something that you shared in the book, so in Time to Rise, your chapter is called Rise and Shine. And you really paint a very vivid picture of what you had to overcome in terms of stereotypes. So I'd like to start there because I think many of us do try to live up to images, right? Like you just talked about, we try to be perfect and we try to project an image.
Yes.
But it's really hard to overcome the images that are projected on us. So talk to me a little bit about the stereotypes that you felt people were projecting onto you and how they experienced you as a young child.
Well, you have to think, by seeing me, you can kind of tell I'm African American.
Yeah.
And born in the 60s, just before the dissolving of Jim Crow and all of those things. And the mindset of the people. And even if you look at today's modern day society, as wonderful as it was to have President Obama as the president of the United States, if you look at some of the offenses that were projected towards his wife, to his family and so forth, kind of gives you a small indication that many things haven't changed to some degree. But being African American in the 60s, male, being fairly large, you're either an athlete or a criminal. Being raised by a single parent mother who had a 9th grade education, really doesn't create an environment that says that, or from a societal perspective, that you're going to do well, that much is expected of you. So here it is, a woman being divorced in the 60s in the United States didn't look at, oh, poor baby, you're not going to be any good and so forth. Other women didn't want you to come to the parties because they put you after their husbands, and you're all of these things. So you have in the 60s, you have a woman with a ninth grade education, raising her kids, didn't want to be on welfare, lower socioeconomic situation. You have two nappy-headed boys, African-American boys, that are exposed to the challenges of being in a lower socioeconomic situation. So from a societal perspective, people looking at poor baby, they're not going to be worth much, they're not going to do much, you can't expect much from them. And if you take on those personas or allow them to, and as we've shared before, create a tapestry for you that doesn't include you, but they project on you and you follow that, causes so much emotional distress, disappointment, and disillusionment throughout life that unless we are intentional about who we are and really tap into who we are, I don't know that we'll ever be authentic, that we can walk in our true selves.
Well, those stereotypes, for people who grew up in various parts of the country, there are these expectations based on where you grew up, or even not just the color of your skin, but the way you speak. Now, in your experience, you did not let those stereotypes limit you, and the way that people looked at you coming from, a single family home, and you were, as you said it, your words, not mine, this nappy-headed kid, you decided to go beyond that. Now, what is the difference? What do you think at the very core of us defines the person who's going to defy all of those stereotypes about where they came from and what's possible, and someone like you that went on to get this higher education, you're running your own company, you're really out there in the world?
I think that I look at it kind of spiritually. I believe that there's been something placed in us, all of us. Before you were formed in the womb, I knew you. That when you were born, there was a purpose, there is destiny. That's what I believe. And it's for us to tap into that space. Now, I think that it is important to have it cultivated. I think it is important that people speak into our lives. However, it doesn't always necessarily have to be someone a perfect script, someone sitting down mentoring to you, but it's looking for a sound that resonates with you. All of the things that we went through. My mother said something to me I'll never forget, that you are not defined by the 6 blocks that you live in. So when I looked at my environment, okay, I could have been consumed to it or recognized there's something bigger, there's something greater. I can tell you, just as a kid, as I was looking at my environmental factors, as I was looking at different situations and the drama of not having a father around, I knew life had to be better than what I was experiencing. In my gut, this is not something that I want to be comfortable with. No different than when I smoked my first cigarette when I was about 11. And I smoked the cigarette and it hit my lungs so awful. I mean, it was the worst, awful, painful thing that I had ever experienced. And I said in that moment, there's no way I want to get used to this. I haven't touched a cigarette since because there was an offense. There was a feeling inside that said, this is not natural. This is not normal. This doesn't resonate with me. So it caused me to say, okay, if there is something else, I have to pursue it because what I have is truly not enough. And the only one that's going to change that is me.
So if each of us then, as you're saying it, we have some spiritual gift or some experience that we're meant to live, you talk in the book about these keys of victory. How do we tap into those keys so that we overcome whatever's going on the outside world to tap into that inner purpose?
Well, we tap into it by understanding our testimony, understanding that there's really no such thing as failure. that each experience that we have is a lesson. Now, it may not always feel good, taste good, but there's something in it for us to glean, to take beyond. So, I have shared with clients that have been sexually assaulted, molested, things of those nature, which is an awful thing. However, you're not a victim, you're victorious. In that situation, you survived an awful situation. And how do you now glean from that strength? Now, I've had been in situations where a lot of different things have happened in that experience, but at the end of the story, those individuals made it out alive. Those individuals are still functioning adults, having the opportunity and the ability to grow and hit heights and achieve goals. So how do we take something that was meant to destroy, but look at it and re-script it such that you see empowerment in the process and glean from that to move you into
And so how do you do that? So how do you do that? How would you do that on a practical level? Like, it sounds really good. Like, yeah, take that lesson, turn it into empowerment. But when someone has been a victim of something, like you said, that's really tragic, that's really horrible, what do you think it takes for us to make that shift in perspective?
It's rewriting the mental story that you've created. And the Bible says, be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. What is the story that you've created as a result of that situation? And is that truly the only option? Is that truly the only story that can be created? So in a very practical basis, I actually have the clients walk back through that process slowly. Now, we actually walk back, and in that, we're seeing the power in that they are actually banishing the perpetrator. In that action, they're going through recreating the story, but reclaiming their power through going back through it, but destroying, to some degree, banishing the offender, to speak to the offender, to visualize what they would like to do to that offender on this side of their healing. And then through that process, they're reclaiming their voice, they're reclaiming themselves, and are able to move through this power. I have quite a few clients that I've walked through this rescripting process that have come into a new sense of self and walking in a greater sense of personal value.
That sounds pretty profound. And I love the idea that it's re-scripting, like taking back one's power. And one of the other principles that you and I have talked about before, and I really want to come back to it, and it's this idea that you say we have to learn how to be comfortable in the uncomfortable. So talk to me about that, because I think a lot of people who have experienced trauma, who are being judged by external standards, it's really uncomfortable. And how do we get to that point of being comfortable in the uncomfortable?
Well, first and foremost, it goes back to recognizing that we're a part of the natural order. If we look through life and we recognize transition is always happening, we're uncomfortable. Think about the growing process. And while you're growing, you're hurting. You sleep. I got a 17-year-old that's growing like a weed. So you sleep. You sleep a lot, your joints hurt, you're uncomfortable, you feel awkward. That's the natural order of life. I even share with clients jokingly, seriously, that, first time we made love is not the greatest experience for many of us. However, but after give it a little while, you finally come up with some skills and it's a lot better situation.
But that is a very, very different analogy. You're talking about the growth process versus making love. Now, wait a minute, Todd, because if you think, now let's take it back. We're both parents here. So I've got, I remember when Sienna was teething. And I used to try to say what you're saying, like, oh, let's just focus on the fact that as soon as she's got those teeth, they're going to be able to really chew into stuff and try to look for the silver lining. But when someone is going through the pain of a painful growth experience,
Right.
it's hard to see that silver lining. Now, when you talk about something like sex, of course, it's easy to think, okay, this is going to suck for a little while, but I'm going to get better at it, and it's going to be pleasurable. So I don't know that analogy really works for me. But how?
Right, but
Go ahead.
But it's the same process.
Yeah, I hear
Remember,
you.
things are processes and systems, and skills are transferable. So yes, this is uncomfortable, and yes, I don't like it. It's not as though being comfortable in the uncomfortable means that I'm always going to be laughing and joking.
Mm.
But what I recognize is it's not going to stop me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still going to go through. This is the natural order of life. I can either complain about it and drag and delay my process, delay my healing by, oh, woe is me, focusing in the negative, or to the point where, yes, it's uncomfortable. Yes, it's painful, but I'm going to move through. The key is when you have the pain or the stress or the emotional uneasiness, is not to allow it to cause you to be stuck.
Mm-hmm.
It's to recognize this too shall come to pass and acknowledge it. We can allow things to happen or try to make things happen. Sometimes, we try to force our way and everything is bullish. But some things we have to just recognize exist, embrace, and transition through it, if that makes sense. I guess.
Yeah, I think that's a shift in perspective, and getting to that point of acceptance and being willing to allow something to happen when it's painful is challenging. So when we get back from the break, let's dig into that a little bit deeper, because I think that some of the things that you experienced in your life and the clients that you counsel, that can sound very naive and perfectionistic. But when you're in the midst of tragedy, of loss, of betrayal, anyway, so when we get back from the break, let's pick it up there.
All right, excellent. Thank you.
Tune in daily to get fired up with insight and inspiration for purposeful living, conscious relationships, and soulful success. You're watching Liberate Your Authentic Self with me, Dr. Andrea Pennington. Check out the live version of this show, where I answer your questions in real time. Visit facebook.com/Dr. Andrea Pennington. In the book, Time to Rise, there are 29 authors who share their personal stories of overcoming challenges. Some of them are pretty serious tragedies. And there are a whole host of skills and insights that can help you on your path to really living a life you love. And today, my guest is Todd Malloy, who has contributed a chapter called Rise and Shine. And Todd, before we went to the break, we were talking about your idea of helping people understand that if they could shift their perspective and look at their painful life experiences as part of the natural order, as you call it, that maybe they could learn to accept and deal with and recognize that this too shall pass. But that is in my opinion, a very mature perspective. And I think for someone who's in the midst of pain, that causes most of us to regress, and we feel like little children. We want to kick and scream and cry and get into that victim mentality. So could you help me just kind of put it into a perspective for someone who is really dealing with either physical or emotional pain or loss? How can you walk us through the process of getting to accept that this is a part of our growth and that we will get through it?
Oh, definitely. I have a client, Beverly, who is in her mid-50s. She grew up with a lot of neglect. She considered herself white trash. She grew up in a trailer that had holes in the floor. Her mother was a hoarder, so they had to wade through trash. She was washed and she was bathed in a trash can out in public in front of her brothers.
Oh my gosh.
She was tormented. She was tormented by kids because she wasn't the freshest smelling girl. She didn't always comb her hair, to the point where teachers abused her and talked bad about her in front of her classmates, things of that nature. So here it is. I have a 50-plus-year-old woman who has very low self-esteem, is angry, who's bitter, who's all of these different things. So in the process of working with her and through this pain is to allow her to give those things a voice. I shared earlier, when we spoke earlier, about people becoming stuck in their emotions. Mm-hmm. And because by design, and I have to take a step back just a little bit, is that we're designed, my perspective, not to connect to self. We're to hear our own voices.
Explain that.
That's the traumatized, as I say, we're traumatized people. Because when you're a kid, you're supposed to be seen and not heard. When you get a little older, if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. And then when you get older, you have to be politically correct to sustain your socioeconomic situation. And that's basic, not including all of the other isms in life. Mm-hmm. So when do we say as a society that it's okay to connect to self and use your voice to say that I hurt, that I'm in pain? None of those things. It's taught, whether consciously or subconsciously, just to go with the program. You got to go along to get along. So in turn, as we have these emotions, they get locked up inside. They become filters, or as I share with my client, filters through which we see life. That means that now I have a distorted view of life as opposed to a clear view of life. That fair?
Yep, that makes sense.
Okay. So now what I started with her is to give her a voice to those hurts, those pain, and those anger. So anger, when did you show up? I've always been here. What do you mean that you've always been here? Well, there was a time that, Beverly was hurting, she was in pain, and she needed to survive. And I was her tool to survive. I allow the client, I have her step out of her own character and to give a voice to those emotional spaces.
Got it.
So now, but in the midst of we talking through that, anger, the emotion, is actually giving you the keys to balance it.
I like that.
So through that process, she began to move those filters that I was sharing that was before her eyes and now be able to see life in a new way. But then as we're progressing through this process and we're dealing with every emotional distress, because anger may be the surface, but then there's shame, there's bitterness, there's all of these things. And each of those emotions have a voice. Where she's journaling and we're talking it out in the therapeutic process. There's a transformation, there's a shift. But it ultimately culminates into now hearing your story and all of the things that you've experienced. At this stage of life, what emotion have you not beaten? No matter what you've carried through life, no matter what pain that you've experienced, what has actually stopped you? There is no hurt, pain, shame that you're going to experience at this life that you have in this phase of life that you have not already experienced. And for the mere fact that we're sitting here talking about it means you beat it. I beat the stereotypes. You've beat the stereotypes. You're a female doctor. I talk to female doctors quite often, and they don't always feel as they've received the same level of respect of their colleagues, but yet they're all successful. They're in a position where they supervise 8 to 10 different male doctors and the different stresses and the pressures. But if you really look at that, that's not comfortable to walk in a room with your wonderful self and you feel judged by everybody else. But once you recognize that, hey, I'm in this room, I belong in this room, I've done the part, so it doesn't matter how you see me, what you think. I'm going to assert who I am and move in the fullness of who I am.
I love that, because now what you're painting for us is you're painting this picture of my life beyond the pain, the shame, all of that, those filters as you describe it. And, another thing you talk about in the chapter is listening to our soul. And I think now I get it, as you're saying, we're taught to distrust our own inner voice or our own desires and the self. So talk to me about the self versus the soul, and what do you mean by we need to learn to listen to our soul?
Well, again, and I have to use my own example.
Okay.
Is that there was in me, I knew since I was 15 years old, I wanted to be a therapist. That was, and just as though my son is an artist, but he came out of the womb with a pencil. It was not a secret that he was going to be an artist because he draws. He'd rather sit at his own party. He would sit and draw, let the party happen around him, and he'd stay. And today he's an artist.
Yeah.
But when he tried not to be an artist, life seemed to change for him. He didn't seem happy. He was unhappy. No different than my situation. I knew I wanted to be a therapist.
And yet your first career was not as a therapist.
Correct. My first career was an engineer because, first of all, didn't know any therapists. There's a stereotype, Black people don't go see therapists. They've got to be crazy to go see one. So it was nothing that was I didn't have a model. I didn't have a prototype to work from. This was just in my spirit because for me, I was able to see my dynamics, understand that there had to be something, a better experience than what I was experiencing and what it looked like people were experiencing around me. How can I be a part of the solution? For me, that was to be a therapist. However, in the course of life and crossroads that I talk about in the chapter, life shifted where I picked, as opposed to moving in what I was innately in me, that will, that drive, my soul was leading me. I resisted it to follow the safe path to become an engineer.
Which is all very, very common, right? So, I mean, at least for our generation. Now, fortunately, our kids and the kids that are coming out now, they're being brought up in a very different environment where people are saying that you can follow your soul, follow your bliss, really tap into your strengths. But for the people who are, you know, our age or older, how do you help them trust or even understand the voice of the soul?
Well, if you allow me, I want to take a step back for a moment.
Okay.
Even though I agree there are more of us talking about being your authentic self and being empowered, our generation is still programming the current generation. I was at a cigar bar. I'm talking to a guy in the room. He became he's a very successful financial guy, but he never wanted to be a financial person. His parents told him what he was going to do.
Yeah.
His son wanted to have a different life. His son wanted to be a teacher. No, he said, I'm only paying for you to be an engineer.
Okay.
Son is an engineer. He's sitting there telling me how miserable he was when his parents did it to him and how miserable his son is, his 25-year-old son, how miserable he is because of what he told him, but he just told him to suck it up because life is okay. Because the quality of life, the money that we're making is sufficient enough to create a lifestyle that we should be happy with.
But that, you know what that leads to, and obviously you already know my story, but that is the exact thing that I did. I tried to live up to my dad's expectations, society's expectations, then the medical realm and what they expected us to be. And then, of course, getting into the media was a whole nother layer. But I got to that point that it didn't matter how much money, how much fame, how much success, I was miserable, and it led me to a breakdown. And obviously the reason I do what I do today is because I don't want other people to get to that point. Because if you knew when you were 15 that you wanted to be a therapist, just like I knew I love creating, I love teaching, I love that process. And yet and still, I went marching down that path of conformity, trying to fit in. I didn't really listen to my soul until it got so painful that I literally hit rock bottom.
Right. And again, and my story is not much different. Transitioning, I was being pulled to be a therapist, but became a frustrated engineer. And through that process, I've had my own breakdowns. I've had my own twists and turns and ridiculous risks that I've made to find happiness in the midst of becoming successful at what I didn't want to be. And through that pain, there came a breaking point where I can't do this anymore because I'm trying to be the therapist, but function as an engineer. My soul wouldn't allow me to rest. So I was doing community service. I was trying to feed that element of me as a hobby in different things. And it just wasn't enough, and got to the point where my inner voice, I won't forget. I was in early 90s. I'm sitting in front of my desk designing a new cell phone. And it was like, I looked at the screen and I said, if I design one more bell and whistle, what does it matter? And my soul said, self said, I can't do this anymore. Mm. And for me, that was the beginning of my full transformation, where I had to glean from my story, my testimony, the pains, the perseverance, the resilience that I had required or developed over the years to now cultivate this and to say, now I have to empower myself to shift the rudder on this ship real hard to change, to create a whole new course of life. Work full time, go to graduate school full time, do clinical work, all at one time. I mean, to the point, to be totally honest with you, my endocrine system shut down because for about a year I lived on Red Bull and 3 hours of sleep. So, I mean, it took 3 doctors, going to see them, 3 different doctors once a week for a year to restore my normal bodily functions and level and balance hormone levels and all of these different things. I mean, it was not an easy transition by any stretch of the imagination. However, for me, it was a life or death, a spiritual life or death situation. I had no choice.
Yeah.
Now I had to wrestle through, how do you tell your family, your friends, hey, I'm no longer going to be an engineer. I'm going to be a therapist. And the first person said, my uncle said to me, boy, you won't make any money at this?
Right?
And then you start to look at yourself as like, hey, what about the investments that I've made? Because not only am I an engineer, I've gotten professional certifications. I'm doing global work. I like the lifestyle that I have. And theoretically, the lifestyle that I have, and if you look at a starting therapist, the money is totally different.
Oh, yeah.
This doesn't make natural sense. But inside of me wouldn't let me stop. And it's gleaning from the life process. It's gleaning through my hurts and pains and shames and how I've come through them. And hey, I felt this emotion before. I felt disappointment before, 5 years ago, 2 weeks ago, but I'm still here. It didn't stop me. Yes, it's uncomfortable. But if I keep moving through it, life has taught me there's another side. I will smile again. I don't like this situation, but this too will come to pass.
That's right. Well, when we get back from the break, I'd really love to dive into this idea that you've also shared about functioning as your greatest self. Because yes. I think this key that you leave the reader with is also really important. So we'll pick it up there when we get back.
Thank you.
You're watching Liberate Your Authentic Self with me, Dr. Andrea Pennington. Check me out on Instagram at Dr. Andrea Pennington. And now, back to the show. It's pretty clear that when we go through a breakdown, really, there's nowhere else to go but up. Yes. Having faced these experiences in my own life with suicidal thoughts and really wishing my life was over, I know how it can be to really have an inspiring image that kind of pulls you out. And so I wonder if you could explain a little bit more about this idea of functioning at your greatest self. You speak about that in your chapter in the book, Time to Rise.
Functioning at your greatest self is really about giving yourself a break.
Yeah.
You know, too oftentimes we're drawn to the negative. We focus on what we don't have as opposed to what we have. And oh my goodness, I've tripped, I fell. Oh my goodness, this paper, I made a grammatical mistake, and we begin to beat ourselves up. However, but actually functioning in my greatest self, actually it was gleaned from me being in corporate America and doing the Six Sigma work and continuous improvement. Mm-hmm. Such that each day we're supposed to build on what we've learned. That if I came short today, that's fine, not a problem. What we're going to do is identify why, and then the next day carry that knowledge into the next day. So I refine my process. But through the process, it's not expected for us to be perfect. Mm-hmm. So if major corporations can make millions and billions of dollars in an imperfect system, why don't I try to interpret that for myself to apply it to my own personal self, such that I can now take myself off the hook, stop beating myself up, and to say, hey, this is a part of the process. No, they're not failures. They're lessons learned. That's what we call them. Corporate America, what are the lessons that we've learned? Okay, hey, I learned not to walk in front of a bus, when it's coming across the road. Okay, so now what it tells me to do, now I have to pause. I have to look both ways while I'm crossing the street, let the bus pass, then I can go. But it's allowing ourselves to be human, to be flawed, to be imperfect, but using it as a stepping stone to get to the next level. So no matter how my day ends up, I'm okay at the end. Now it's for me too, and because I've been being a therapist and thinking, I happened to travel over the most recent holiday, Thanksgiving, and I saw someone that hadn't seen me in 35 years. Mm. And 35 years ago, I said, well, you may not remember this or know this about me, but I'm a thinker. And he said, Todd, you were a thinker at 18. Uh-huh. That's who you are. But what I do is I go through my day. At the end of the day, it's processed through my day. What was I happy about? What was I uncomfortable with? And then what do I glean from that? How can I now take that hurt, pain, shame, disappointment, whatever it is, and now say, what can I learn from it and carry into tomorrow such that my tomorrow is better? The growth process is continuous. There's no point in life where we're going to plateau. Mm-hmm. Because I always share, when things are flatlined, that typically means it's dead.
That's right.
Stagnant water begins to create mold and smells. So we're consistently supposed to be moving and growing. And by allowing myself to function at my greatest self in this moment and in this interview will be different than my greatest self in the next one. Because this one will allow me to build and do better the next time. Maybe I won't be as nebulous sometimes and zero in on a point.
Oh, Todd, quit. See, y'all, now he's picking at me. Oh, Lord.
So, that's what functioning in your greatest self is about. Give yourself a break and allow yourself the ability to grow. Mm-hmm. We have potential to grow, give ourselves permission to be.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I love that idea of just accepting our own humanity, giving ourselves a break. It invites in the energy of compassion for ourselves. And I think it also invites in this ability to give other people a break.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Well, one of the other things that you and I have talked about a lot is a principle that you are very excited to share with the world. And that is the importance of being present, honest, and sincere in every moment. And that word moment, it brings me back to what you were just saying, that we've just got to pause, look at where we are right now, take stock of what's going on, draw from our lessons and our strengths. But it's inviting this new idea of being just honest and sincere about what's working, what's not. I mean, tell me a little bit more about this, because I know it's a big, big part of your philosophy.
What I work with my clients is really to tap into that inner voice that's been stifled our whole lives. That authentic self, that truth. And earlier when we used one of the keys, listening to your soul. And really being in every present moment, what is that inner voice saying to you? And trusting it enough to verbalize your experience and your truth in that moment. And be open to its truth, then move into the next step. So what I often share with clients in the midst of their discourse and their communication is don't always go to responding to what someone is saying. First, what you do is just sharing your experience. Here is my truth. Irrespective of what's going on around us, no matter who we're talking to, our truth is our experience.
So give me an example. What do you mean?
Okay. So quite often, I'm talking to clients and the husband may say, I am frustrated that you're asking me a question. I answer you 4 times, and then you still ask me the same question. And then you ask me to come into the next room to find you, to retell you what I've said. The wife said, the husband is saying, he's sick and tired of me. That's what she heard. So now she's responding from that energy. So as opposed to, but by hearing what her perception was, slowing it down, as opposed to her just saying, well, F you too. What she said, he said, no, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is about accountability. What I'm saying is, hey, I don't mind doing anything for you, but what is your responsibility in connecting with me and hearing my truth? So about being present, it's about sharing one's truth. Now, in that, and going back to staying in line with, growth and transition and rising and shining, that, hey, when people saw me, I'm a tall guy. So everyone will see me and say, oh, you should be a basketball player. You're an athlete. And were you a football player and all of these things. But in my soul is like, as opposed to going along with it, no, actually, I'm more the academic nerd dude. I just happen to be big. This is my truth, and I'm not ashamed of it. And now, as I'm willing to do that, the atmosphere around me creates an environment where I can thrive because my truth is out there.
But doesn't that take a lot of practice? I mean, yes, you and I are there. We're there now. I can share my truth like that but it took practice to do it and to feel safe enough that I wasn't going to get my head bitten off.
Correct, but it's a process. Remember, life is a process. There's no just hit a button and, hot water, stir it, and here we are. No, it's a process. And how we do it with my clients is small risk. Small risk. Where are you comfortable making the small risk? But what I do is walk them through, because oftentimes I walk people through their professional life. Because actually people spend more time cultivating their academic and professional life than themselves.
Yeah, of course.
So what I often do is say, hey, when you're at work, here are skills that you have based on your profession.
Okay.
And here's the prowess that you've had in that arena. Now what we're going to do is skills are transferable. Take those skills and now apply it to your personal life. So now we're tapping into giving yourself that voice. Remember, society has stifled our own personal voice. But now where are those areas that you feel safe enough to use your voice with your children, with your partners, at the grocery store with strangers, because you'll never see that person again.
Yeah, exactly.
So, hey, I don't appreciate you cutting me off in line, and no, you can't stand in front of me. But to get the small wins, because once you get the small wins, connecting to yourself and being present, honest, sincere in every moment, now I'm walking and moving in my truth. And it's like throwing a pebble in the water. Once I begin to walk in my truth, it begins to resonate into every dimension of who I am and begins to change the environment around me. Therefore, I'm cultivating an environment where I can continuously thrive and grow and really truthfully introduce myself to my public, to my partner, such that now I know they want me, not my representative. Freedom is in that, to know that you're accepted for who you are. And even if they don't accept you, you're so comfortable in yourself and in your own truth, their others' opinions don't matter.
I love that. So how would you recommend somebody get in touch with that sense of worth if they have just come through a divorce or a bankruptcy, or they've come through some illness or challenge that did cause their outer image to be challenged?
Cool. Well, again, the first steps to using your voice is sometimes you have to journal.
Yeah.
I always encourage clients to journal, to share your truth, to give it a voice, get it outside of you, because as long as it's inside of you, it's stuck. And if it's stuck, you can't move. You limit the flow of energy through your body. So what we do is get it out. We begin to journal. And through that journaling process, And then we read through it. We read through their journals. We process through their journals and now begin to give them a voice. I have a client that had some things to say to her mother. And, oh, I can't say it to my mother. My mother's my mother. She's reverenced. She's all of these things because of power distribution, power imbalance.
Yeah.
However, even though she's an adult, like the mother's an adult, she still sees herself as a 9-year-old kid. However, she began to write her mother's story and she just let it all out on paper. But as she let it out on paper, she felt more comfortable because she doesn't want to talk to her mother in that form or manner, but the message is important for her mother to hear. But through that process, she was able to journal, but now she invited her mother on a girls' weekend away. Where she's processed the information enough to learn to have a healthy dialogue with her mother. And we've role-played the dialogue, we've role-played the conversation. And we've worked with her enough that this is your truth. Your mother may not be receptive or receiving of what you're going to say. How are you going to handle that? But you know what? She said, it's more about me getting it out than any type of response I could get.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that about journaling. I love that about the writing process as well. It's one of the things that I tell a lot of the authors that I work with or that I publish, that just the process of sharing your story or writing a book is transformative for you. Like, people think it's all outwardly showing, getting a book out and being recognized as an author. So tell me a little bit about your experience. Like, you've clearly done public speaking, you host your own show, the Man Cave Conversations, but writing, this is your first group book project, and I know you got several books in you. What has it been like for you to go through the writing process?
Well, it's kind of funny you shared what you just stated, because irrespective of me being a therapist and all of these other things, when I began to write, it began to really process my life and my story and what I hope to be my legacy. And it challenged me. It challenged my perspective. It made me see that am I perpetuating family of origin issues? Am I bad patterns that my father created, my mother may have created, or my situation may create it? It really made me take a look at myself and be honest. Therapists have therapists, and I had to go to my therapist and I said, I'm writing this chapter for a book, but it had me started thinking about my own self, made me I had to look at me.
Yeah.
And so forth. And so it was a great process. There were things that I didn't recognize that were still pent up that I was able to process through as a result of this process. And I'm glad I did, because at the end of it, I recognized that I was able to reframe my story and look at myself and say, hey, I'm not so bad.
That's right. Well, Todd Malloy, it's true. You're not so bad. You're doing some good things in the world right there in North Carolina with your practice, with Man Cave Conversations, and now with taking your voice really out to a global audience with this book.
Thank you.
I think you're doing some great work in the world, and I'm very honored that you're a part of this project. And I look forward to the next chapter in your world, your life.
Thank you. No, with this process, it's kind of helped me move forward. I recognize there are books in me, and going through this process is kind of now giving me a methodology to follow and trusting my voice. I have to be honest, when I first submitted it, I said, oh God, is anybody even going to care? Anybody going to be impacted by this? But once I got the final review back from you and I read it, I actually read it. And at the end, I said, hey, I actually got something out of this.
Yeah, imagine that.
Yeah, so no, this has been a great opportunity for me, and again, it has motivated me to continue to write and allow this to be a part of my growing process. So thank you so very much.
My pleasure. Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. I know that you will enjoy reading Todd's story in Time to Rise, and I'm sure that he'll be participating in several of the other author Q&As. So if you have questions for him, you can also leave them with us. So I just want to encourage you all to really own your own story, because you can rise up. You can make progress no matter what life is throwing at you at the moment. So once again, just remember that you truly are a gift to the world. So share your presence with passion. Much love. Bye. How do you pick yourself up when life knocks you down? Perseverance, grit, determination, resilience. These words describe natural human qualities which help us bounce back after any type of setback: illness, loss, betrayal, bankruptcy, divorce, abuse, and trauma. No one is immune to experiencing the tragedies of life at some point. Learning how to use your potential to rise again is what will keep you going. I'm Dr. Andrea Pennington, creator and publisher of Time to Rise. In Time to Rise, 29 inspiring changemakers share their personal stories of transformation to prove that you can reclaim your life, find your purpose, and re-emerge as the powerful creator that you are. It can be tempting to think that the people who succeed in life or who recover after major devastating loss are special or somehow endowed with magical powers. The reality is, within you are the very same powers. You have the potential to live a life of meaning and purpose in alignment with your values. You have the right and the power to reclaim wellness, live with vitality, and enjoy real happiness. Get your copy of Time to Rise and enjoy free gifts with your purchase. May this book help you reconnect to who you really are. May you find peace and hope. May you claim this moment as your time to rise. Visit timetorise.me and buy the book anywhere books are sold.